Yeah, it's helpful because I think I tend to use a little bit like I have my strength parameters of what I want to be able to see, right? And then before even if they're not all the way there with that strength, I'll start putting in some running light drills. But sometimes it's hard because especially with ACL, their stiffness strategy is almost too good. So it's really trying to get them out of that stiffness and loading into knee flexion because they'll load, but they'll load all in their hip or not their knee. So it's really trying to retrain that, which can kind of be a long game, but then they might be able to meet the demands of kind of that stiffness and a little bit of that running. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's not always the ideal match if maybe what I'm looking for.
So I can use an example of an athlete where, like, let's say I pick them up later in their process. Okay. Like they've already been running. And then when I'm evaluating, I look and say, ooh, this running does not look good. So we can use this as a case example. The running does not look good. Their jogging just looks asymmetrical. They have a stiffness strategy on that side. So what do? So I don't want to stop them from running because just where I'm at, it's not a great, like, or just the position I'm in, it's not a great thing to like say, okay, we're not running, you're not ready to run. So I need to mask this a little bit psychologically. Okay. But I can't have them keep running like this because I think it's going to create problems. So that's when you start looking and saying, all right, how do I actually explain this and then find a strategy where we're going to be able to hide the deficiency while training more efficient running. Okay. So that's what comes down to your track drills. So what I did with this person, I said, okay, we're going to do some build up stuff before we start running. And I told the person, I'm like, we're going to do more running, less jogging. We're going to do more running like you're a track athlete. And I kind of gave them that frame. Okay. So it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel different, but that's the type of running I want you doing right now. And I pointed out to them, but they're stiff and they felt it. So what I said to them is like, at any point during these drills, if you don't feel fluid and it doesn't look fluid, we're going to stop there because our goal is to be cyclical. Our goal is to feel, and they can feel the difference. So you start them with that rhythmic kind of march, take them to the skip. How does that look? Take them to that rhythmic high knee run. And most oftentimes it's going to look a lot better and feel a lot better. From there, they actually have a sense now of what this rhythmic fluid motion feels like. So what my goal always is for this person in this case scenario is to get them into I'll call it like an ascending build-up run. So in the track world, they'll call this like a dribble bleed. Some people will. So what that is I'll start with a low knee run. They transition to a mid shin, then they transition to the knee over time. So it kind of builds up. So what it does is it kind of takes them from low to higher to higher to higher. And then eventually it turns into this kind of like cyclic run where it's more of this like kind of high knee run. But what that does is it creates more of this cycle motion rather than a foot lands in front, boom, foot lands in front. So what I'm doing is I'm creating more of that smooth slope rather than that jolt that I showed you on that graph. And the feedback you'll get from that is, or like, oh, that feels better. That just feels smoother. And it'll look like that to them. And I'll tell them like, hey, I'm not trying to change the way you're running because sometimes like, well, this feels weird. This is goofy. This isn't how I run. I'm like, I'm not trying to change that. But ultimately, what I want to do is start pairing this closer and closer to your normal run to maybe where your normal run is a little bit more like that. Okay. But if I think about if their normal run's here and they're going to get back to this, my rehab now actually is just getting them from here back to that. But what I'm doing is I'm training those constraints, like keeping them from being able to do that. But I'm still building running volume and I'm still working on the physiological and neurological aspects of running while I work on the qualities to get them here. So I'll call this sometimes like, I'll like term it like, okay, what you're doing right now is like level 10 goofy running. What you were doing is a 0. So I'll say, okay, this next rep, let's do an 8. Let's do a 6. Let's do a 4. And I kind of build them back to that. And I say, eventually, I probably want you, like, we'll find a comfortable point, but maybe your point that you're going to be at is like a 2. And we'll work back to that. So I think the running, honestly, if you can coach that and put them through that, it's a way to keep them engaged and train that stuff and train those qualities that is specific to the demands they're going to be facing while you train those qualities that are keeping them from doing the other stuff. And to me, that's return to run. That's really what it is it's not hiding from those drills. It's not avoiding the stuff. It's changing the force profile of it while you catch up. Questions with that? So I'm see if I can find something.
While you look at that, and the only other thing I can throw out there is if you're working with different types of runners. So like when I was working in Colorado, I had a lot of trail runners versus road runners. So just kind of consider context as well. On the trail, you need a lot more of that compliance and that capacity to manage load, larger joint ranges, that kind of thing, because you're kind of moving in a different way, a little slower pattern. But once in a while, you need those quick reactive forces for like, hey, I'm hopping rock to rock. And yet, it's not as predictable and not as stiff as sometimes like the road running. So just throwing that out there, like, again, we'll talk about context of the patient, but kind of like what Ant was saying, just keep considering that context and where's the gap? What can't they do? Maybe the trail runner can hop rock to rock, but they can't run with that more compliant nature up a hill. So just kind of keep those things in mind as well.
That's a fantastic point because there is a major difference in style. So like, when you start talking about like, that's the big thing is like, when you start talking about striking underneath your center of mass, there's a good amount of strength and body control that's required for that. So they'll start talking about, oh, runners need to strike on their center of mass, but like, well, good luck having that 70-year-old person do that. They're not going to be able to express that because they just can't control the position. Okay. Neither can the 13-year-old. They can't, they have to strike, they have to reach, they have to overstride. They just have to. Because they don't have the anthropometrics of control to do it, or the strength, the relative strength of body weight to do it. So we're not talking about switching them and transitioning them. We're talking about bringing them one notch closer. That's it. And give them the ability to go a little bit, because think about this. If I make every stride just like 0.5% more efficient, what does that do over 5 miles? It's significant, right? What does that do over all the strides I need to do during my rehab process? It's going to protect from tissue overload. And again, like this is no different than progressing the exercises you're doing to protect something. You're changing the vectors of force. You're changing the rate of force. You're changing the magnitude. The way to think about everything you're doing as a physical therapist is like, what I think about is like, there's 7 components to force. Okay, I might mess this up, but there's magnitude, rate, frequency, variability, direction. Oh, what's the other ones? I'm gonna forget the other ones. That's what I was looking for, my slide of that. But you take those different variables, you take that physics, and what you do is you think about yourself like a DJ at a turntable. Okay, those are your dials that you're turning. Okay, so for this individual, I might need to turn down the magnitude and turn up the rate. So that would be, I'm going to hold on to a band. I'm going to work on short coupled work because that's what this person needs right now. Or I might need to do the opposite. Like Corey said, I might need to change the direction of force application because this person's going to be exposed to unstable surfaces or non-flat surfaces, right? So, or I might need to protect them from certain things at this point. So I might need to just kind of lower the whole thing down, the whole profile. So use your judgment as far as like your other movements are proxies to tell you what can they manage when it comes into a dynamic task. Because all you're doing is you're constraining things down. You're constraining it down to its constituent parts and saying, okay, if they can't do this, I don't think they're going to express this the way I want in a dynamic task. Okay, so now you take that element out of the dynamic task and still train it if you can. And again, there's no problem if you're not comfortable, it doesn't look good. There's no problem waiting. There isn't a problem waiting, but you have to eventually start slowly turning up the dial in that running. I think when you know you're successful with this, for me, it's been like, you're going to start using your metrics and you're going to still have your checkpoints because your checkpoints are like the bumpers in your Boolean lane. They're there so you don't fall into the gutter. But eventually you're going to get good enough to say, all right, I see everything building together. I see how they're doing this pattern. I see how they're doing this pattern. when they start and I've ran my drills enough that like jogging is nothing. Like I am not even thinking about them jogging because it's going to be just one small notch up. That's a well-run process. And for me, that's when I knew that like, okay, my process here is good with this individual. An example that I had with one kid that's always sticks out in my mind is like, it was one of the last patients I had, an outpatient, before I transitioned to the job I'm in now. But this kid was like, you know, it was like kind of that thing of like, okay, doctor's cleared you to run, we can start running today. So he came on a Monday and I was like, all right, man, like we're gonna start jogging today. And we're gonna like start doing some intervals. He looks at me, he goes, well, I've been jogging for 2 weeks at home. And it was like, the thing is, like, I wasn't mad because it was just like, or I waited because the doctor didn't clear him, but like I knew he was ready. And then we started running and it looked fine. And I knew it was gonna look fine. And to me, it was like he had the confidence in his body to do it. And we knew the process was enough that like it was just one little thing. Right. Not ideal. I don't want it to go that way, but it was kind of a nice thing of like, okay, I think we kind of hit the nail on the head with our process here.
And then real quick, because that goes to your thing, Kayla, too, like when are you adapting to, like Ant said, like a heel strike type of run or reaching a 70-year-old, a 13-year-old? When do you adapt versus restore? And I think it just keep in mind what Ant said, even if it's like a smidge better, a small percentage better, even if they're not going to get to 100, can they get like a little percentage better so that you're getting them more capacity than what they have? You might end up having to do an adaptation. So whether it's actually like, I have a kid with CP right now that I'm going to have to adapt how he's running, but he can, you know? So if you can get to as close to your standards of what you imagine they can get to as possible, that 1% better, like Ant's saying, then the adaptations and the restoration are kind of going to be as much as both as you can find out where they land kind of thing, but you're still trying to find the dials like Ant's saying. So.
Absolutely. What other questions do you guys have?
My question was mainly about like dosing and like, I guess I feel pretty comfortable with ACL, but like the mom that comes to you with like hamstring pain, stopped running because it hurts to run. Like I just am like kind of at a sticking point with like programming, and when this person is used to running marathons, how much do you suggest they start trying again? First, the person, like, I don't know, I just think of myself, I probably wouldn't want to run more than like maybe 5 miles at my best. Like, where would you start someone like that? Because those numbers are going to be so different. And that's the biggest sticking point for me.